More than 53% of the students are women in Latin America. They prepare, they become studied, they grow. Their fertility rates went down, and as a result of all these factors, women are vindicating and having a more public position in societies. But since we live in the best of two worlds, as Dickens said, we also live in the worst of worlds. There are many topics still pending for women. In our region, we also see the highest rate of murder through gender violence, the greater proportion of teenage pregnancy. The truth is that much progress was made in our region, but we continue to live in a subcontinent marked by inequalities, but also economic success, that we're living within this world crisis. By reading the New York Times today, I'm sure you read it as well, I was truly angered at seeing that ISIS are kidnapping women, compelling them to get married. They're being raped, they're being sold. It's happening in Iraq and Syria while we're talking here, speaking about the progress made by women. We will be discussing all these matters during this talk. Let me tell you how this will work. Although you're already familiar with each and every one of them, our panel members, I will ask a question from each one of them, and they will be responding in 5 or 7 minutes. And then we would have an additional hour, and that hour will be dedicated to have an interaction so that you may participate. You can tell us whatever you want, and we will try to respond. So we have Chiara Paola Capdevila, member of the Executive Board of the Industrial Union of Paraguay. I don't know if you want to add anything to this brief presentation. What would you like for people to know about you? Something very briefly. Good afternoon. Is this working? Yes, good afternoon, and thank you so very much for this invitation. I feel truly honored to be here. I have a factory of for packaging and bottling. We have Keiko Fujimori from the party, who's the party leader of the Popular Force Party in Peru. I wish to thank CAF and as well as the Inter-American Dialogue and the OAS for this invitation. It was an honor for me to share this panel with leading women in Latin America. I'm a politician. I've been a Congress member. I've been a candidate to the presidency, and I'm the candidate of the Fuerza Popular Party. Rosario Pérez, the president of Pro Mujer, Mexico. I'm very proud, not just representing Mexico, but we are in 5 countries in Latin America. Originally, I come from Mexico. And as I say, we're very proud because we're giving service to 300,000 poor women. We give them credit as well as health and training services. We are working in Argentina, Bolivia, Peru, Mexico, and Nicaragua, and we hope to go into Colombia briefly, shortly. Ms. Cecilia López Montalvo from Colombia. Aida, Michelle. If the women who are here do not know me, I would commit suicide. I'm an economist, and I would like to start by expressing a complaint because this morning there was a panel on the Latin American economy. They were all men. I think that there are many women in Latin America who know about economics. So now you see what things are. I apologize because Cecilia is very timid, and it is difficult to make her talk. So be careful. Alejandra Mora Mora, Minister of the Status of Women in Costa Rica, President of the Inter-American Commission of Women. Thank you very much for attending this meeting. I am very pleased to see that there's a specialized panel because all the population of the Americas have much to say. These are all on the topics that you have taken up today, and those topics affecting women in particular. We'll finish with Aida Michelle Ureña de Maduro, President of the Union of Industrialists of Panama. Yes, indeed, for me it is a true pleasure to be here, not only as the President of the Union of Industrialists of Panama and as a Panamanian woman. It is a great honor for us to have been invited and to discuss the issue of women's participation throughout these various issues. I would like to second what has been said here in a forum that, like this one, that there were so few women speakers. I think I counted them. There were 58 speakers in total and only 15 women that would be talking. So I think we deserve to have a better participation regarding these matters, for there is a tremendous knowledge on behalf of the women, both those present here as well as those who are not. I think you all agree with what you've stated, but let us begin. Let me tell you how we're going to be working. I will begin by asking a question to each one of the ladies based on their knowledge and experience, and then we will open up the floor for your questions so that you may participate, and that will do with the hour and a half that we have, and I think we can stand a little bit like other groups. I start with Ms. Capdevila. What we said in the beginning, in my initial submission, I said that we're in the best of both worlds and in the worst of both worlds. Best of times, worst of times. What is the reason why there is such a tremendous contrast regarding the status of women in Latin America? I think that in Latin America we are overburdened by history. We're colonized by the Spaniards and the Portuguese, having a highly machista culture. There was a cross between the Spaniards and Portuguese and the native population. So this resulted in a very machista culture that we bring alongside. But the struggle of us, the women, in the last few years has been very important from the position we find ourselves. I work with the private sector, and to go into the Industrial Union and its board of directors was quite difficult. The Industrial Board is almost 100% men. I also have a factory which I'm a provider to industries where we mostly have men. Besides being a woman, I'm very young. I'm 26 years of age. But when I began this industry and this enterprise, I was only 21. So it was a twofold challenge to have to prove, first of all, that I was selling a product that was extremely good and competitive, and at the same time to say that in an enterprise I was a responsible woman. So there seemed to always be a distance between me and others when negotiating. But I think that this struggle has been conducive to our having a better character and grow and show that we're as capable as men in order to take up any enterprise and to maintain our independence. I always struggle for being economically independent from my family since I was very young, and that resulted in my being highly motivated in order to be able to forge ahead and show that being a young woman, I could occupy an important space in the market. For about 6 years, I have been an industrialist, extremely proud with my corporation and the people who work with me. And the industrial sector is indeed very important, for it generates a large amount of labor, so of work, of jobs. As regards the guilds, our guild is basically one of men, but gradually we conquered the few women who are in it today. We're just members of the board of the Union of Industrialists, and little by little we were able to open up and get that space for us, showing that we're extremely capable, that we struggle, that we dream, that we have a true wish to occupy that space that we have gradually conquered, something which is very important in the case of women. When women is determined to doing something, in one way or the other, it tries to achieve it by way of work and effort. And I think further, and going back to history, I believe that formerly women were considered or seen only as a companion at home to take care of the children. But as a result of the struggles by so many women, that situation changed. We know that the legislation, that the laws were made for men, but thanks to that struggle, the situation changed. And the main reasons of the contrast in participation of women in Latin America is based on the roles that have been assigned to men and women based upon their gender. And this makes women to be placed mostly at the level of unproductive private life, whereas men are in the public and reproductive life. So it is precisely there where the situation is heading. Um, as regards this discrimination in society, to give it a name, I had a chance, and we spoke with Mrs. Fujimori, by the way, who wanted to be president, and maybe next time we'll see how it goes for her. But I had a chance to interview Michelle Bachelet, president of Chile, after the elections in December. And regarding her re-election, she was telling that one of the issues pending during her first administration, although she managed to make progress, getting respect from society, she was speaking about the policy of gender equality was not precisely what she liked. It was difficult for her to make progress in that area. So I asked Mrs. Fujimori, how is it that women are becoming strengthened in power of Latin America, such as the president of Argentina, Brazil, and Chile? And we don't see actually gender equality political reforms. And this is what Ms. Bachelet told us. It was one of the great challenges to which she find no solution. I think that the gender agenda cannot be limited to a discourse. There needs to be a gender conscience, a true commitment toward women living in cities, but especially women who live in the countryside. Indeed, experience shows that it does not suffice for women to have a place in power to bring about greater equality. But I would like to highlight that it is also important that there will be more women leaders and women in important positions in both the public and private sectors, because that will generate a point of reference for women in general, but especially for the future generations, for the young women. To me, it is a matter of tremendous pride to see that there are women presidents, Michelle Bachelet, Cristina Kirchner, Dilma Rousseff. Beyond the ideological difference that might exist, I very much salute the fact that there are women leaders, and also the fact that there are ministers of state and important women in the boards of directors of corporations of great prestige. That is indeed important. It is important for our societies, and I acknowledge also that this does not suffice. It is not enough. As well as having access to a position of power, it is also basic that a clear knowledge be had about what are the actual gender problems, what are the necessary policies based upon evidence in order to be able to grapple with inequity. I deem that we have to reach power in order to resolve many problems, but power has also got to be reached to cater and take care of Latin American women. We cannot fail to acknowledge also that there are leader women who receive constant pressure on the part of those who do not believe in a gender agenda, for whom this is not a true priority. However, women are 50% of the population, and our inclusion in the economy and in politics will represent a natural development of our societies. I'm also aware, and it is relevant to highlight this point in this House, that in order to forge ahead and bring out gender policies, we must include and clearly understand men. It is basic that men feel that commitment, that they truly understand the importance of gender policies to be able to thus transform our countries, our peoples, and societies. The most critical issues have to be resolved with greater strength, and I'm referring to issues of violence against women and also early pregnancy among teenagers. All these problems have to be grappled with, and until we have adequate public policies devoted to resolving such issues and prevent women from falling in the traps of poverty, once we have policies devoted and dedicated to women for them to get education and protect their safety and security, only then will we have not just a discourse of gender or a mere picture, but a true discourse with awareness of gender that will bring about change. I will ask another question, if you will allow me. In paper, sometimes this sounds spectacular, and this is what we're all striving for. But you who were a president, and you had to deal with all these issues, when you discuss with the president of Peru, Mr. Fujimori, what can be done and what couldn't be done? In the case of Peru, during the administration of my father, Alberto Fujimori, there was a chance, of course, of travel and be in the summits of Cairo and Beijing, dealing with the issues of women. And after attending those meetings, there was a decision made to establish the Ministry for Women. The quota law for participation of women in politics was adopted, and in order to prevent the violence against women, as well as a reproductive health program to teach, educate, and give women the capability and determination and decision-making power as to how many children they should have. Ms. Capdevila told us that there is the idea that women have to be at home and men have to be at work, and that seems to be a reality. Let me give you an anecdote. When my children were born, one of my daughters was in first year of medicine school. She said, I must work, I must be with the kids, said my wife, and she decided to spend time with the kids. And she spent some 8 or 9 years with the kids until the time came where she said, I must go back to my professional activity, although it is important and kids are important, but I also have to grow as a woman. So what I would like to ask from Rosario Pérez, how is it that we can resolve this situation, something which happened to my wife and other women have to do by need. They have to go to work because they have no alternative. How is it that we can reconcile family and labor life of women? Before answering your question, let me say that I was very much surprised today during the panel this morning, where nobody spoke about empowering women economically as a weapon for growth and poverty eradication and elimination of inequality in Latin America. According to World Bank, from 2000 to 2010, the poverty was reduced through the empowering of women, economic empowerment, by 30% in Latin America. So I deem that it is indeed very important in our region to realize not only that this is the best thing that can be done or the ethical way to proceed, but rather that it is the most intelligent investment that governments and corporations and countries can make. And this is something that we see on a daily basis with the communities with which we're working. The problem of a balance between family life and professional or economic life is something possible, and the most important hindrance for the incorporation of women, both as far as labor is concerned, as well as for her having her own businesses. We see this in the case of our women, who, besides taking care of their family, and this is something which they see that they are the true pillars of support of those families, and the family would not advance without them. So they are made to choose non-very profitable businesses because they have to take care of these two fields of endeavor. In Pro Mujer, we have carried out what we call circles for children when women come to pay back their loans or to visit a doctor, and this has been a matter of great success. So I believe that much of what we have to do, and the government has a lot to do in Latin America, governments must have anti-discriminatory legislation and give much more support to nurseries and to other types of services and incentives, both for parents and men to assume a greater responsibility regarding family life. And there are very good examples in Europe and in Germany and in the Scandinavian countries where indeed this has given excellent results. And I believe that the corporations and within the corporate field, I believe that they are now realizing that it is tremendously important in order to maintain and retain women's talent to focus on these matters, such as flexible time schedules, having nurseries for the kids. I live in New York, and banks such as Goldman Sachs has its own nurseries. And how is it possible? It is because they have realized that that is indeed necessary not to lose the very many professional women who work for them when they bear children. Indeed, according to what you said, the support of the men, and I was listening to this earlier, Ms. Fujimori was saying that indeed such an intense activity, and she was thanking her husband for this effort. But we're speaking about the empowerment of women as regards economic issues. But with regard to the political issues, and that is my next question, electoral systems were reformed so that the laws that have a minimum presence of women 30 to 40% and the will of political organizations be broadened, which empowers the women with regard to political participation. Let me ask a former senator, what do you think in this connection, and what solutions do you propose in order to have a greater participation in the field of politics for women? These quotas are indeed important. They have enabled many women to gain access. But there are certain power situations, but this very much depends on the political parties. The political parties are like those in Colombia, which are misogynist. They just allow for the friends, the women, the lovers to be joined in. But the problem of the power of women is much more profound. The fact is that the greatest transformations of women in the world stopped in the 20th century. The 21st century, and this is shown by gender indices, and that of 2013 so speaks. I was not allowed to present the graphs that I wanted to show you, because what has happened is that that index that measures the situation of women with compared to women shows 4 groups of variables: health, education, economic power, and political power. In education and health, women in the world, we already have equality. We're at the level of 1-to-1, same level of men, or sometimes even better. The result is that when we move on to economic and political power, it's a true tragedy. The political economy, we have Sweden and other countries, there's no more than 60%. And in political power, is a true chaos, 20%. Those who handle the country are the economists. And that's the way it is. So, this is the problem. What does this mean? This means that the discourse regarding gender has to be changed. This idea of continuing to give health and education for women, what for? So that they reach the labor market and they're crushed there and they become frustrated. There's a phrase which makes me angry. They say there's full employment in Latin America. What a disgrace to say this. Who is the person who said this? How can you say that there's full employment in Latin America when 50% of women in working age cannot do so? And not because they do not want to work or because they can. They have better education many times than men. But this is due to the economic situation. The women have to cook, they have to take care of the children. Men are no good, but only good for generating income. And it results that this care has become the most important break. And the World Bank, for example, doesn't go beyond this. I have Dr. Jose Antonio here who has supported me, and we're going to be publishing a book soon. We all publish our own books, which sometimes serve no purpose, but some other times they do. What we're trying to do in actuality is that the care will continue to be part of the public agenda. Difference has to be established between the care and the economics of care. One thing is love. The men always tell me, how are you going to remove the love of the mother from their killed children? I'm not going to remove love from anybody. What we're going to withdraw is the responsibility of dealing with the diapers, of cleaning the house and cooking. The idea is that this economics of care, those tasks which are carried out in the house, those chores in the home, that these might be carried out by third parties and that they will move into the mainstream of the economy. What does that mean? Well, that the state will take up a part of the market and that these women will then be able to go out to work and may have a possibility to move into the political power. Unless we women have political autonomy, and someone else said it in this panel, there is no possibility to have political power. And whilst the women don't have economic autonomy and be able to make the same decisions as men, say you're your husband, who has a better result in the labor market? It's me. So you stay home taking care of the kids. Unless those decisions can be made, there is no gender equality. Unless women have true economic empowerment, which is this otherwise will reinforce the traditional roles of women, which is very bad for women. ECLAC says so already. But in any case, unless that happens, women, first of all, will not be able to reach power. The fact that we have 3 president women, who is too concerned with that? If most of the presidents still happen to be men. And secondly, is that gender agenda that you mentioned, violence against women, the teenage pregnancy, etc., is it not part? It will not be part of the real agenda until women be empowered. Speaking of teenage pregnancy, it seems that the women made themselves pregnant. Have you heard about this? It seems that women get pregnant by themselves.
When you speak about violence, why is it violence? Because women is not autonomous. Even high-level women, if my husband hits me and I earn money, I'll throw him out. Won't I? Well, I already did, actually. So, to conclude, the problem of power, the problem is that we have to change the discourse. And I have a fight which I've had with many feminist friends, to say that we have to educate women, etc. Well, the only people for whom education is not a channel of social promotion is for women. To a certain extent, you can be a PhD doctor. If you have 4 children, 3, 4, 2, 1 years old, nobody can help you. You cannot work even if you're a genius. As long as you don't solve the problem of the economy of care, then there will be no gender equality. So that is very marginal, what you've just saying. Well, you do deserve an applause for that. By the way, regarding what Cecilia said, Matilde Sanchez, a journalist, wrote an article in El País, and she said the following, or he said the following: there's a paradox that women may have power but do not socially enjoy true equality because of the conservative structure of family and the role of women within these families. Very often women accept this. She says, I prefer to be at home and taking care of the kids, where my husband cannot take care of the kids because he doesn't have the instinct. So Alejandra, what is your opinion on these kind of statements on the conservative structure of families that leads to a situation where the woman plays this role, and very often the women accept this? Yes, I think that a lot of our friends and colleagues have spoken of this. And what we have to understand is that true changes in women's situation beyond quotas and migration towards equality or parity actually have to do with changes in the social structure, and the use of time, because that is important, the use of time, because the problem in the discrimination against women is the labor segmentation, to have located men in the world and women in another world. So the problem is that when we women become part of the public world, well, the other things happen the other way around. Men did not insert themselves in the same way in the private world. For instance, in my country, the organization structure of families has to do with 35 working hours for women and 15 working hours of men. And I think that in those 15 men, in order to weigh them, we had to include take out the trash, wash the car, and do gardening, because otherwise we could not get accounts right. But to include this is very important because, yes, we do have to include it, but on the other hand, these are the elements of the economics of care that can be substituted. However, what women do every day with the children, with food, cooking, etc., that cannot be substituted. Either we do it or not. So the distribution of time is an important mechanism that has to be borne in mind. But there are other two additional elements, and that is income distribution. Money, not only to be within politics, because that requires money, of course, and to find money. And it seems that men have a better ability to find this money, but also our own money that has to do with segmented labor conditions. I think that it is important to point that out, and we have seen that how every time that we speak of production or productivity and competitiveness, it is men who speak about that. But when we speak about distribution that has to do with social distribution, it would seem that that's where women are. And the problem there is that it has a different social weight. It's not that we're placed in one place or the other. It's simply the weight is different, and the economic axis and social axis is different. And finally, I would like to say that we have to be in true power. What happens with women is that when we go into politics, they don't place us in the hard nucleus and core of the problems, but in a parallel one, in the periphery. So that's what leads to a situation where we have true difficulties in having true access. And another thing that I also think is important and that should be truly taken into account is the responsibility we women have of having another look, a look that has a certain cost. What I mean is that every time we speak, for instance, about sexual and reproductive health, and we speak about women's control over their own bodies, we polarize society and we face groups with economic and ideological power that lead to a situation where we ourselves go back in our discussion on these strategic issues. I think the woman in politics has a historic responsibility vis-a-vis other women and must claim her struggles as well as take these struggles to the hardcore nucleus of politics. That's where we can change things, as the journalist said. Laura Chinchilla, when we interviewed her at CNN, she said, as Mrs. Fujimori, that she reached the place where she is at thanks to her husband, that her husband played a certain role when she went out to work. Speaking about women, there was a study by CLAC which came to my attention because it spoke about corruption. This was a survey shown by CLAC where it shows that there's a favorable position and opinion towards women's leadership, saying that women are less corrupt than men. So the question I wanted to ask now to Aida, who is a woman who is in a market that, at least in Argentina, I could not imagine a woman being in labor unions because it is a very hard and difficult group. I don't know how it is in Panama then. So how a group such as the labor unions, it says very often that labor unions are hit by accusations of corruption. So why don't women have a more active participation in our region's labor unions? Well, I think I should make a clarification. The labor union of industrialists in Panama is one of employers, not employees. That's different, even though the reply and the answer is the same, because the obstacles are the same. We have the same obstacles that have been mentioned by all the other women present here in this group. But it's not only that, but since they have all of these different tasks, women tend to say, well, right now I can't take care of that, or X or Y or Z, and they don't take up a leadership position. But it is true that in general cases, most people think that labor unions are for men, because when they think about labor unions, they think about hard work, and I don't know why they think that women are not involved. They think only about physical capacity and not in women's intellectual capacity. And that's the part that I think that is not taken into account. And as for labor unions, in the area of true labor unions, it's not that there's a problem of corruption, but it is true that at least in the case of Panama, it's always the same people who are leading the labor unions. This does not change. And I think that that's what has led to a situation where people think that this is a kind of dynasty and no one else can go into these labor unions other than those who are already there. And as for labor unions, that's what they prevent the entry of other people, whether they're women or men. But women, actually, the barrier they face is one that is invisible and set there by society. There's nothing that says women cannot participate in segment X, but society has determined what role each one plays, and that is what has been changing in time. My attention was drawn to a comment made by one of the first panelists when they spoke about how companies in Latin America have evolved at a different level than multinationals in other regions, at a lower level, which reminded me of a study that I read where it says that companies where there's a greater participation of women in leadership positions are also more productive and efficient. That may be just a coincidence, but I don't think it is. Plus, I don't think it is a coincidence that we have the same levels of participation, which is what has led to a different response. It has been so difficult to evolve, to change and develop. That same study stated that if women continue participating in companies at the same rate as has happened historically, that means that women's participation will increase only by 2% in the next 10 years, which means that we need to effect a change. We need a change in the general policy so that women are more involved, there's a greater share of women, and thus we reach a better level of equity. It says that women in leadership positions, only 5% of these women participate in the boards of directors of the companies, and 8% participate in mid-level management positions. Out of the whole population, that's the only proportion of women in these different levels. What happens to all women who have trained and gone to the universities? All studies have shown that at any university, regardless of the career, there are more women than men, more women that are going to formal education at the university. Masters, well, high school masters, PhDs. So why is there no greater participation of women in high-level positions? So I feel that men tend to promote themselves, but how many women promote themselves? How many women truly acknowledge their own value? And why all the experience they have acquired throughout the years? I don't think any of us here will say that it is not true that it has been difficult to reach their position. This has not been easy. It's been done with great sacrifice. I'm also a mother, and I have to repeat the same thing. If my husband and my daughters did not support me, I would not be here speaking to you as I am today. That is an effort, a family effort, but it's a question of training. It is something that has to begin in the roots and that we have not taken that into account. Maybe some women, some mothers, prefer to be with their families, and just as it was difficult for you to reach the level where you are, aren't there some women who prefer to stay at home and have the husband work outside the home? Isn't that a women's decision in some cases? Yes, it is. But why did this decision come about? That decision came about because the woman says, I feel this responsibility, because historically, the responsibility of leading the family in the home has been in the hands of women. I will tell you a very funny story that I heard. When my first daughter was born, on the first day we're at home, and the girl's crying, the baby's crying, and I didn't know what to do. I was desperate. For me, that was new. And I went and woke up my husband, who was very comfortably asleep, and I said, come and help me. And he said, but I don't know how to do that. And I said, do you think that I do? Did it just come by nature? So it's the same thing that happens with society. No question that woman is framed into a role, and that is the role she has to play. So when you take her out of that set and mindset, then men simply don't feel that they must have the same know-how if we're simply human beings. And men also feel affection and have to learn how to deal with children as women do. So why do we think that that is only a role to be played by women, where men don't have to participate, even if it's by their own choice? I do this because I don't have enough confidence in my husband knowing how to do it. Very often women feel that too. Cecilia wanted to say something, but first I wanted to say something. I remember when my children were crying, my wife also didn't know what to do, and I didn't either. I don't know how to describe that, but the children calmed down much more with her than with me. I can assure you that. I would try and the kids would continue crying. And when my wife, who didn't know either, they would calm down. And I acknowledge that with children, she's much better than I am. I don't know, there's something between them. There's a chemistry. And I don't think men have it, even though I adore my kids. I know I sound machista, but I'm not. Listen, you're very good looking, you're very intelligent. But what do you think of that introduction? I have a daughter. Well, I remember an economist, a very famous female economist, who said, nowhere do I go to where the Ministry of Agriculture doesn't say, well, I had a grandmother who was a peasant woman. What man says, well, I have a wife? No. No, look, this is really a sort of piggy attitude. But, well, you're fantastic anyway, but still. The point is, and what I wanted to say is as follows. The value of the economics of care has been already measured in Mexico, in Colombia, and it will be measured in Costa Rica, and maybe, I think, even Panama, too. That is becoming more, that makes the use of time become more visible. What is the survey of that value? In Mexico, 17 to 19% of GDP. That is what third parties can do. In Colombia, it's between 19 and 20% of GDP. That is much more than what agriculture contributes, only 6%, industry, 11%, the financial sector, 18%. The idea, that's what I was saying, that we're speaking of a new model of development. If we can ensure that these values become visible, that the economics of care become visible, that you can distribute it, imagine what can happen. You will increase employment supply because there will be many women who will be working. But the state and the market will be beginning to send men. If you are well done, you're okay, and you're being paid 2 minimum salaries to change a diaper, I'm sure you would learn how to change a diaper if you were paid that. So, employment will be generated, taxes will generate. Imagine that you don't transfer 20% of GDP, only 10%. That is the development model. That's what I was saying, that I agree with Dr. Ocampo. Let's bring him here next time. Well, after what Cecilia said about my daughter, she made me feel so poorly that I will give the floor to you. I'll take out the yellow card. So this is interactive, and let us have you ask questions. Let's begin here. Thank you very much. I think you're brilliant. Your participation is brilliant. And Maria Elena, Mrs. Lopez, you think like a man dressed as a woman. Don't say that. Please don't say that. Women, we have to think as men and feel as women. Our feeling is one thing. Thought should not separate us. I do agree when you say that, in effect, women's position, and we are blind and we're nearsighted. But please turn around, look at the audience here, and see how the demographics have changed between last session, and this session. It's not a question of you, the panel, and us, the audience. We, in our heads, we have built in a mechanism that makes us choose what to do and what not to do, where to go and where not to go. The trick here is what she has indicated. Man learns when he has to. If I soak all of my husband's underwear with red clothes, he will learn to wash tomorrow because he won't have any more underwear. So the mistakes that we make in our domestic lives lead them to learn. Just as we, when we make mistakes in their professional lives, they take a role of leadership. It is true that we don't take our place, and it's a process, a learning process that we all should take into account. Even our colleagues from CAF, who so kindly have invited us to this conference and who have segmented this session without really a male presence. Men have to be here speaking seriously about female leaders, speaking about this kind of economics of care as females and women do. Let's see how many men take the floor. How many men are able or willing to take the floor? I'm Graciela Reyes. I am a former representative from Uruguay to the Organization of American States. At present, I work at the Department of Education of the United States. Contrary to what has just been said by our colleague, I would like to say that I think that the presence of all the gentlemen here is important, and the interest with which they're following all of these interventions and how they're enjoying the comments you're making. So my question is, what can you say about the rights of women in sexual and reproductive health, and about the way in which state, or to what an extent the state is involved in private lives? You know that within the Inter-American dialogue, excellent work was done by Mrs. Cabano on all of these subjects. I know that the president of SIM also mentioned that, and it is a controversial issue. A question to each one of you, to all of you. Would you like to answer? I think that this subject is one of the most important ones. We are always saying that the woman who does not control her own body cannot control her environment. And that is the core in which we have to work so that women can make their own decisions. The recent decision by the Inter-American Human Rights Court on the case against Costa Rica, Octavia against Costa Rica, in vitro fertilization, included two central elements for discussion. One came from the subject of health and placed it in the more political category, more the politically correct category, which is self-determination, the possibility of women to make their own decisions and to decide. And a decision is, do I want to have a family? Do I not want to have a family? How many children do I want to have? Spacing between and amongst children and access to services. And then it also placed another essential element, and that is a state which truly believes in complying with human rights should give universal access to services. And it placed in the center of discussion the access to services. And the second subject that was discussed is interference, abusive interference by the state. In other words, if a state in the area of body and self-determination, in the ability to make a decision on one's own body, the state, if it has to issue a guideline, well, the Inter-American Court clearly states that that is abusive interference by the state, and that in the area of the family and of self-determination in private life, decisions have to prevail. Personal decisions have to prevail. And I'd like to point out that these discussions, well, imagine the level here where all of us sitting here, men and women, we are privileged people. Imagine what is happening with women outside, the invisible women, those who truly don't have this kind of information, where they cannot negotiate if they want to have sexual relations or not, if they can have or use contraceptives, if their product is the product of sexual violence. It is of that that we're speaking when we're speaking about defending women's rights, universality of access. In my country, the problem or the subject of teenage pregnancies, 12.8% of women from 12 to 18 are already pregnant. And we have to eliminate that element of people thinking that that is natural. And very often these women don't have their children with people their own age, but with older men, and that is an abusive relationship. But we have to not only speak about abortion, but we have to place it in the center of the issues, and we have to have the courage to discuss this with fundamentalists who think that this is not a valid discussion. Let us take advantage of time, because would anybody like to make a comment? If not, we go to the next. Yes, I would like to make a comment on women's reproductive rights. This is critical for the region's economic growth, especially regarding teenagers, because it means that the likelihood that teenager, that adolescent, will be a productive member of society disappears because she stops studying. I was speaking with Julie Katzman from the IDB, and this cost the region an enormous amount of money. So another thing that is very important is the empowerment, economic empowerment of women, because once you empower women, including adolescents, teenagers, well, what we have shown in a study in Bangladesh, it's not only a question of access to contraceptives, but the most important factor is empowerment, economic empowerment, that they have their own money. That is the most important factor. I think we have to take out this subject from the area of health or religious beliefs. It is an economic need. Mrs. Fujimori, did you want to say something? Yes, first I wanted to clarify something. When I said that my husband supports me, but he's a professional, he works, he has an MBA as I do. And with him, we share the responsibility as parents. We have two daughters, a 6 and a 4-year-old. I just wanted to make that clarification. And with regard to the question, yes, it is essential that women have the ability to decide when and how many children to have, that we have the necessary information, and that there be education campaigns so that from the time they are children, boys and girls be taught that men and women have the same rights and equality of opportunities and conditions. And I would like to emphasize the idea of having prevention campaigns to prevent teenage pregnancy. There are data that show empirically that if a woman delays her first pregnancy, she will have a better quality of life, more labor opportunities, while if a teenage girl, and in the case of Peru, it is 14% of teenage girls who have already been mothers or are pregnant, which is one of the highest rates, well, that girl who will be a mother, unfortunately, won't have labor opportunities. She won't be a good mother, and this becomes a vicious circle on that the responsibility has the that the state has the responsibility to break. Let's see, one of the men. This is a difficult situation, I know. I simply wanted to ask any of you on your opinion on quotas versus other mechanisms of positive discrimination. One can say, yes, you can impose quotas by the state, that is. And sometimes that works, but other times it does not. For instance, Norway attempted quotas in the board of directors of companies. It did not work. They had to go back on that measure. So are quotas a mechanism to promote equity, or are there other types of affirmative action, of positive discrimination, as we call, that could have the same impact? What do you think? Well, when we speak about gender equality, why do we need more quotas for women? I don't think that there should be specific quota for women. If we're speaking about gender equality, I think women is perfectly able of solving a problem. But of course, the government needs to provide the necessary conditions for that to happen. As Mrs. Fujimori said, it has to be part of the government policy to have these kind of decisions and policies.
Sí, tal vez hay una.
Yes, there is a false dichotomy between the quality of women and access to the various spaces. We wonder if the women who are arriving into politics are the best or not. And as regards women, this is always a mandatory question. It is obvious that unless there are affirmative actions, the evolution would be so slow that in order to reach and have an equalitarian parliament, we would have to wait a long time. The quota must be also paired by the changes in the use of time, distribution of money and access, and real powers, but also migration toward this parity seems to be a true challenge that the Americas is facing, and it has its negative aspects. Costa Rica has moved to parity, and in the first election where we had a 38.6 of parliamentary women, we went down to 33% because they did not ensure the leadership. So the legal technicalities and the quota sometimes are adverse, and it is not just the interlocked listings, but also the headings that will assure a better training. Although I share your ideas, and this has to do with the capacity and capability that every man or every person has to participate, but we tend not to do anything unless we are obliged to doing it. So in order to be able to change the trends, those quotas must have a true participation. I don't like the quotas, but if nothing is done in an obligatory manner, changes will not be introduced, and I don't think they should be permanent. But this is the only possible pathway to take this step in the rest of Latin America. The example you gave us was from Norway, where the situation is entirely different than the realities we have in Latin America and women's participation in it. So it is important that we continue to change those policies gradually in order to incorporate women. Once that parity has been achieved, once that ideal is attained, we can eliminate the quotas. This is Fujimori. Yes, because a matter of ego. As a woman, we say we do not need the quotas. We women can show under the equal conditions that we're as capable as men. But reality shows otherwise. I'm the president of a party, and this year in Peru, we are conducting regional municipal elections. When I travel along the Andes and the Amazonia, I know that 60% of the councilors are women. To me, it is a true relief. But then when the candidates stand around me to the mayor's offices and the regional governments, I realize that still much remains to be done. Most of them are men. I could tell you that 90% of the candidates to the mayor's offices in my country are still men. So the quota law has been important, but we still have a very long way to travel. My experience, which is quite lengthy in many sectors, I can tell you that the most machista sector is the productive, because this is what not was understood. The struggles of women are not to educate or have health. We live more than men already. We have more years of useful life. We have better education. But the problem is power. That's where there is the clash, economic and political power. And the place where I had never felt such a tremendous burden, where I left politics, is the field of politics, because the fight there is a real one. So quotas are a mere step forward. In Latin America, we're speaking about parity, but it continues to be a mere discourse. The situation is much deeper. I like the idea, of course, of changing the development model. This might sound tolerable or make economists nervous, but unless we show that there's a productive factor which is being underutilized to speak about productivity, and for us to have the same level as men, while that doesn't happen, women will continue to be in the same situation. How did you resent that machismo and that politics of machismo? Could you give us an example when you said how terrible? Well, Marta Lucia has been more successful to me because she got 2 million votes against 2 million of men, 2 million men in her party, and she deserves a round of applause. And whereas I was taken out I had to leave. When one is a woman and reaches political position, the one who becomes subjected is very lucky. And if the husband also has votes, so much better. But if you are a person who is competing, having a perverse policy like the one that exists in most of the Latin American countries, and you're in competition, you stand no chance whatsoever. It is a suicidal task. The fact is that Colombia, which used to be a leader, first country having a participation rate of 50% in the labor market when Chile only had 20 or 30%, today we're at the very end of the line because the struggles have reached power. We haven't had a minister of finance or a minister of the interior or a vice president in our country, and much less a president. This time there were two candidates who, very daring, the Marta Lucia and Clara, managed to get 2 million votes, which was a true prowess. But in spite of that, they were crushed. But that is what happens. We get crushed. That is true machismo. Go ahead. My name is Leticia. One day I would like to have daughters. But I was thinking about quotas, and in Australia there is an initiative which begins in the private sector where various industrial leaders established an initiative where they want to increase the number of women in each of their various industries. It's a private initiative effort which has much marketing and publicity because of the benefits and the attractiveness it poses in society. So at what point can we change this corporate culture so that participation of women may be seen as a true benefit, where companies in Latin America may grow more as compared to companies elsewhere in the world with a greater participation of women? In the U.S., it is said that one of the barriers why women do not participate or cannot be able to go further along in the corporate world and entrepreneurial world, it is because most of the businesses and the various informal networks in which men are still prevalent. So it has to do with the golf club or the spa or the luncheons, and oftentimes women are excluded from those events. So from the cultural standpoint and from the standpoint of the private sector, and how can we start changing that machista mentality in Latin America and to perhaps leave government issues on the side? How can this machista attitude be changed? In Latin America, machismo is truly terrible in corporations. This is not my statement, but rather a study by McKinsey on the gender and the women in business. This has to do very much with what we said earlier as regards this labor balance. 70% in that study of the women who had been well trained, they said that they had to either leave their jobs or not go beyond taking greater responsibilities because of that very situation. So I believe, and we do have very good examples also in Latin America, whenever the leader of the corporation, the high leaders, present this as a priority in their agendas, things do happen. It is like when a government takes this as an endeavor. And something that I was saying with Melinda Beard, who was the ambassador under Hillary Clinton for women at the Department of State, we must convince men that they, in corporations, this will help them be more successful, make their companies more successful, because women throughout the world have 75% of the purchasing decision making, including cars, are made by women, where we may think it is men. Well, and this is not because you just have to be nice toward women, but because it has true economic sense for corporations and for their stockholders. Since Cecilia has referred to my recent experience as candidate to the presidency, I would like to give you a consideration. When we women have leadership roles, we have the obligation of opening space for other women. I've heard this speech and discourse about women as if that woman was the only woman. But there are many women coming behind making similar efforts, and our moral obligation is to open up that space. I was Minister for Foreign Trade, and I had a Vice Minister and pro-export minister who were as efficient as myself, trying to seek out always to open up a pathway for other women coming behind. I was a Minister of Defense, and I always wanted to have general ladies in the Army of Colombia as well as the police, and today we have women generals. So it is important to have a congruence between what is spoken and what is done. And when we touch on the issue of mayor's offices, and Cecilia says that this is a suicidal attitude, but when one reaches a certain level, at an age such as mine, where I'm quite old, we realize that much yet remains to be done to open up space in politics, where the tremendous and the greatest challenge lies. It is like going into manure, and when one does this, it seems suicidal. But indeed, that is the true manifestation of courage and congruence. If we want to change possibilities in our country, we have to change them from the standpoint of politics, empowering women. Women not only have to be protected, they have to be promoted by way of education, an opportunity to have access to political positions in the Conservative Party, which is horrible because, as well as any other parties, has tremendous degree of machismo. But today we also have a network of young people who are wonderful, including very many women. And that is my task, to empower those women so that they may reach first level positions in 10, 15, or 20 years. But this is the type of change that is taking place by way of the participation of women in colleges and university, together with women that open up space for other women and will result in a tremendous change in our countries in a few more years. I would like to wager on this, although it might find suicidal, but this has to be done from the position of politics, seeking out the most capable and competent women, because we acknowledge that there are many of them ready to serve in that field. Thank you. Why doesn't this happen? Do women prefer to work under having a man under them rather than a woman? Let us say the case of a cabinet of Cristina Kirchner. 80% of people under her are men. The same thing with Michelle Bachelet and also with Dilma Rousseff in Brazil. Why is it that women, when they have a possibility and the power to have her be joined by women in her mission, why do they select men? Is there an answer that may be given to this question? Truly speaking, we cannot blame everything on men. I think that we women still lack a great deal of security to perhaps copy some of the virtues of men, one of which is solidarity. We women are not solidary, and whilst women don't have solidarity among and between them and truly recognize the value of other women, it will be very difficult to do this. Speaking about campaigns, the only money I had I dedicated to women. Progressives voted for the left, and those that were semi-progressive for liberalism. So that's the way it was. We women are not very solidary, and Talucia, I think, showed that women started voting for her. But women sometimes compete for absurd things, for children, intelligent kids, whether one is fat or thin. But we women have to be professionals. Men have many defects, but they have many virtues. Try to get from a friend of your friend what is the name of his little friend. That kind of solidarity is important. It is required for women have to be more professional. In order to conclude, it is a matter of establishing that model role, something that we women have failed to do. Politics is an issue by election, but private activity It is as a result of decision of women themselves to realize that they truly have the capacity to do things. Let me now reflect on my personal experience. I belong to the Association of Industrialists and the Federation of Central America and the Dominican Republic, the Industrialists Association of Latin America. And in all these organizations, I'm always by myself or just with one other person. It is always men who surround me. But what happens to the rest of the people around me? It is important that other women realize that it is possible to give that example so that others may likewise participate. I feel extremely proud, however, because during this last year we had elections in many entrepreneurial private guilds, and out of all of the guilds, 3 more women presidents of guilds emerged. This is a very good progress made in the guilds. In the case of the Trade Union of Industrialists, I'm the first woman after 68 years of existence of that Trade Union of Industrialists, which is a very long time for women to be there. I wish we could do much more. I apologize, we're running out of time. But to conclude, if you so agree, I would like to have an idea of each one of you as regards women as decision makers in Latin America. If you could be very brief, but let us conclude by hearing a 2-minute comment by each one of you. I think that by way of our example and the struggle of each one of us in the sector where we find ourselves, we must become a true example for other women so that they be encouraged to undertake these efforts from the private sector and to establish their own businesses and occupy important decision-making positions, because oftentimes this lies in ourselves. Sometimes we're fearful. We women are afraid, and we must overcome that situation. Mrs. Fujimori. I have been a presidential candidate back in 2011. I was the first woman in the history of my country which went into a second round, and I lost by a little more than 1 point. I had 48.7%. It is indeed true that in my country there is a great deal of machismo, but Peru is already prepared to have a woman president, as well as other countries in Latin America. Mrs. Perez, I believe that for Latin America, the best possible investment that can be made by any multilateral or any corporation or government is to invest in women. And if they do not do so, they will have the same problem as Japan in 20 years, because our population is aging. So it is indeed there to where we must gear and direct our efforts. I think the time has come to change the discourse of women and the strategies. No more charity, no more poor women, no more we're vulnerable, no more of that. We do not belong to minority groups. In my country, we're 51%. This is why so many of us who are by ourselves, because there are too many men. But the discourse has to be changed, and this has to be through the economic pathway. If we show the next element that might lead to equality is to do away with the inequality of 50% of women vis-a-vis 50% of men. Yes, Alejandra, we must consider this not just from the group of feminist women and solidary men, but rather from the perspective of human rights. It is indeed a right, a vindication that has to be made necessarily, and it is also a matter of democracy and quality of democracy and inclusiveness, which has been so broadly discussed today. In the case of economics, likewise, it should be for politics. And I would close with this phrase of a Mexican feminist who stated that when a woman reaches politics, it changes the woman. But when many women reach that level, we change the politics and the policies. To the extent that each one of the networks may recognize and inform others as to what they're worth, what they can do, and what they know, that change will actually take place. It mustn't come, the recognition must not come from others. It has to be women who recognize what they're worth and to truly acquire their position that corresponds to them in society. Thank you so very much. Round of applause for all of you. Thank you.